So hybrid cloud enablement, we're pleased to have an exciting panel. Mike Nguyen, founder, CEO of Inflect, will be the moderator. Inflect is a San Francisco-based startup that is building an open and neutral online platform to enable buyers and sellers of internet infrastructure services to connect, collaborate, and transact. Mike brings 15 years of experience in internet infrastructure consulting, successfully helping companies such as Facebook, Twitter, Twilio procure the infrastructure and grow. Mike saw the light and went all in on building the online platform everyone wants and needs. So please welcome Mike Nguyen, Inflect, to moderate hybrid cloud enablement challenges and opportunities.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. It's almost as if I wrote that. It was awesome. Anyways, thanks everyone for joining. Today we are talking about hybrid cloud, not from a technical perspective, but from a business standpoint. All the products and services anybody needs to build a hybrid cloud exist. The problem is finding the right service providers, finding who owns them, buying from them efficiently, and then ultimately managing all of the infrastructure across multiple vendors going forward. So we're talking about some really interesting topics here. We've got a great panel. We've got the seller's voice, so service providers, both from the data center side and the network service provider side. We also have an analyst voice with Sammy down the end there, talking about the industry as a whole, and then the voice of the customer. So first off, I'll do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll get right into the questions. Down the end there, we have Sami Badri, Senior Analyst from Credit Suisse. Sam?
Sure. Sami Badri from Credit Suisse. I look at the communications infrastructure and communications equipment sectors. That includes everything from towers, fiber, data centers, all the way to network switches, service provider switches, routers, etc. Anything that touches the network is generally in scope on my side. And a huge part of my job is understanding the behavior of enterprise spenders. So that's a little bit about me.
And we have Anna Claiborne, who's VP of Products for Packet Fabric.
Yeah. So Packet Fabric is building the AWS of network services. So I'm in charge of bringing the archaic sector of network into the now with automation.
Excellent. And we have Patrick Douglas, who's Senior Solutions Architect from Digital Realty.
Yeah, so Patrick Douglas, Digital Realty, as you said, I spent 25 years building networks and then finally moved over to the data center side where I'm helping customers on the connectivity side figure out how to connect to cloud and everything. So.
Thanks. And we have Jerry Fassig from CoreSite, VP of Sales.
Hi, I have responsibility for this market as well as our strategic cloud relationships. Part of that responsibility is the go-to-market direction of all their private connectivity products. We've been doing that since the initial AWS Direct Connect rollout in 2011. And just locally as an example, this is one of the markets where we are one of two of the native providers for AWS Direct Connect as well as Microsoft Azure Express Route. So a long history of people trying to put together that hybrid cloud architecture.
And then we have Daryl Jabala from Twilio, Senior Manager of Network Services.
Hi, I manage the carrier connections team, so we're responsible for connecting all the voice and messaging carriers to the Twilio cloud platform.
And as Brian mentioned, I'm Mike Nguyen, founder and CEO of Inflect. Inflect is a data-driven marketplace. We're making it as easy to buy data center and network services as it is to buy AWS. We're free to use, we're neutral, and we deliver the most accurate data available. So with that, I'll give a low and slow question over the plate here. So Sammy, let's start here. What are the biggest business challenges for companies building out hybrid cloud as you see today? So we'll start with Sammy, go from a high-level perspective, and take it down to the operators.
Sure. So that is generally a very big question, and I think it's very misunderstood. Generally, when the enterprise wants to make a decision of finally deploying workloads out of the traditional IT framework, that includes servers sitting in the office buildings and moving them to a co-location facility or even their own data center, there are many different counterparties involved in the process, as many people probably know, but the actual expertise and skill sets involved to make such a transformation are actually a big bottleneck in the sector. And a lot of the reasons why we find as big constraints to enable hybrid clouds actually have a lot to do with enterprise engineering. They're just realistically not that many engineers that can just lift and shift workloads out of traditional IT architectures. And my research view is generally that we are in the midst of a transition. We're probably only a third there, but it's probably a massive runway to go until enterprises actually have the skill sets and the right services to finally move everything that's sitting in the traditional IT architecture and more into a hybrid cloud architecture. And most enterprises are going that direction. It's just a matter of time before this picks up a little more momentum. So this is a little bit of my higher level view, and I'm very curious to hear how some of the other panelists have to say and their view of the current transition.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think one thing I heard you say there is the lack of expertise and skill set within an enterprise holds them back. And working with Daryl here, Daryl, this is for you. So we've worked with Daryl over at Twilio, really from the beginning of when Twilio started migrating workloads out of AWS. So a bit different from enterprises migrating from their own data centers into retail, colo, and cloud, but really the same lack of expertise. So maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges you faced.
Sure. So our challenges came from the other direction. Twilio has been a public cloud native company from the beginning. Where we started running into issues is connecting to enterprise customers and legacy, voice and messaging service providers, where really your only option is going to be connecting over the internet, open internet, using some sort of software VPN service, or using an Amazon Direct Connect in our case, since we're in AWS. Amazon Direct Connect is great, but there's not a lot of intelligence to it, so our solution was to bring the network edge out of Amazon. So we have a firewall and router stack sitting outside that allows us the control and the routing that we need to accomplish those goals. The challenges, especially with a cloud native company, is they weren't accustomed to finding the space, the connectivity, making the right choices for that. And even as someone who's been doing this for quite some time, it's always a challenge just to figure out who's where, what they can actually do for you. If it's their services that they're selling, or their assets that they're selling, or they're being resold to you, and who else is out there that you might not be familiar with already. So a lot of those challenges are what Mike and Fleck have been helping us deal with throughout this process.
I appreciate that. And so one of the challenges that we ran into was actually trying to change the mindset of Twilio, right? So being that you've built your own network for the last, however many companies, however many years, I won't sell you out, but going to a cloud native company, just convincing people they should buy something more than a MacBook Pro was a problem. You talk a little bit about that, and then we'll throw this to the service providers and how they help.
Sure, that absolutely was challenging. For a company who thinks everything can and should be solved in software that can be run on a public cloud, it's very difficult for them to understand that certain workloads may not quite be there yet, and a lot of those are these edge workloads and VPNs where you need optimally custom silicon to make sure that your latency is going to be consistent and good and low. We've also run into issues where just basic business issues, like they've never bought something like this before. So just essentially legal AP. You have to go through all of that so that they understand security. You need to understand exactly what you're doing so that it fits in with the rest of the business. And those are probably the biggest challenges to get started on this type of thing.
So Jerry, let's go right down the line then. So Jerry, how have you and your team helped out enterprises or cloud native companies looking to build out hybrid and with this lack of expertise and understanding?
To Daryl's point, exactly, that lack of expertise and additionally with the public cloud providers really not wanting to overly promote the private connectivity products themselves because they don't want to create this, fear that, the internet might not be safe. So they really rely on the service providers to do so. So, it's really a development of a lot of internal engineering resources and advisory resources for the enterprise. And really what we've seen is exactly what Sam said in with Daryl's case, in that the typical enterprise, there's a lack of expertise, but then there's a very siloed decision-making process. So data center is usually the realm of the real estate guys. When it's talking about cloud, it's usually the CTO or people that are just focused on the application and not the stack. And the network is generally kind of an afterthought, and it's really quite critical. I mean, there's every time Amazon, one of them, has an outage, everyone focuses on Amazon being the problem, or the other cloud provider. And then you look at it, there was an outage in US East last year, and then they did the client role of affected customers, and it was like all these Bay Area customers, and I'm like, why are you single sourced in US East? And really, take a look in the mirror and take a look at how we re-architect this thing to really serve your end user, as well as provide resiliency.
I think, Patrick, you deal with a lot of clients for digital, building out the hybrid cloud. Maybe give a little bit of viewpoint there as well.
Sure, yeah. So I visit a lot of customers, and they basically have the same set of concerns, which is security, and not only the availability of staff, but the price of those people. DevOps people aren't cheap, and so there's that aspect of it. There's the security aspect of it, performance aspect of it if you're going over VPN. So we actually commissioned a study to find out what people's concerns were. And just about in every category, it's about 25% people, 25% of those asked responded pretty much the same down the line on each of the concerns. Managing multi-clouds, the personnel we discussed, security aspects of it, performance aspects of it. So we also did a study to find the difference between using VPN over the internet versus a direct connect, and that study indicated a 55% performance boost at the application level for a direct connect versus a VPN. Not to get too technical, but it's just the compute power required to create that tunnel. The fact it's less efficient because you can fit less data into each packet because you got the VPN overhead. All of this stuff is eliminated with a direct connect, so you get a reliable, secure, and very fast connection. Like what you mentioned, Jitter, you have a very predictable performance level. You have much lower latency, and the security aspect of it, it's not only that you have to use VPN, but the fact that if it's going over the internet, people can still capture all those packets potentially. And as computing power gets heavier and heavier over time, it's theoretically possible that that can be cracked at some point in time. So you really don't want your traffic exposed out there on the internet if you can avoid it. So I think direct connect is the way to go, and that solves a lot of those problems. I mean, not the problem with personnel creates a problem because then you have to figure out how that actually works with the direct connect going. But it solves a lot of performance and security issues.
And Anna, Packet Fabric is doing some interesting things from a network perspective. Can you talk a little bit about what your goals are, how you help customers build out a multi-vendor solution, hybrid cloud solution?
Sure. So as Patrick already touched on, there's connecting to the cloud has quite a few issues, right? First you have your security and performance issues, which just moving from VPN to a direct connection can solve. And so that's really easy to say, okay, we'll just move over to a direct connection. But there's a lot of different layers just in that direct connection, right? Cloud service providers, they're not network service providers. They know very well how to provide network services to themselves and in their own internal environment, but they don't know how to provide services externally. Like the limitations of most direct connect products are, we're going to give you a port, or we are going to give you common internet peering. That's the extent of what they give you. There's not a lot of help. To set that up, you have to have that expertise in-house that we've already sort of established doesn't necessarily exist. So then the question is, how do you, as an enterprise, as an external cloud user, how do you make that network connectivity work to move a workload from point A to point B? And that's where, of course, from my perspective, that's where the biggest challenge is. And especially when doing that, like even doing that today through a lot of service providers are doing it yourself through Amazon, it's a very manual process. There's nothing around that that exists to automate it, except for the newer platforms like ours. You can't simply turn down a connection at will. Most of these things are, if you want to turn up a connection, it takes 30 to 60 days. And after you make that sort of time investment, you're not just going to turn it off. So the only way to make these things truly dynamic is through automation and programmability, and to have APIs to do this sort of stuff. And it's going to get more critical as we go into the future, because this hybrid environment that we talk about right now, it's in-house data center, versus the public cloud. Well, that's going to become also the edge now very, very quickly. And so you're throwing in yet another layer of complexity of where you need to move content, of where you need to move data, of where you need to move workloads. And unless you can do that quickly in an automated fashion, it's going to become more difficult than it already is.
So we heard a couple of the challenges here, and a lot of them focused around expertise internally, the ability to understand a multi-vendor solution, how to source it, how to really justify internally, as in Twilio's case, to the different stakeholders what to buy. And also we heard about the network side of it. So not just simply network matters, but how network is being sold and how that ties into both retail, colo, and cloud. So the next question then is, and Sam, it's for you to start off with, recapping those challenges there. How prepared are enterprises as you're watching them make this migration? How prepared are they to handle these challenges?
Yeah, sure. Well, very short answer is not very prepared. And I give people a general example of the responsibilities of a workload within an enterprise. So generally, enterprises, think of them as Fortune 500s. They're generally about 20 different people responsible for different aspects of a workload within an enterprise. These 20 people report to one big, maybe senior director. The senior director overlooks maybe 5 to 10 different teams. So that's 5 to 10 different workloads. Now, if you approached one of these employees who works for one of these workloads and says, hey, we're moving this workload to a co-location facility, this person will literally have no idea what to do, because the scope of their work doesn't actually involve lifting and shipping a workload. It might be involved on QAing a workload, or checking its optimization, or tuning it up, or checking with support tickets, etc. So there's a huge gap generally in the level of preparedness enterprises are at today in terms of what they should do to finally make these decisions to transition over. So as far as preparedness, I would say very little preparedness. There's also a little bit of an engineering constraint. So the engineers that are generally very bright, that want to go launch software-defined networks or reprogram things from scratch to make them work very efficiently and effectively, those engineers aren't going to enterprises to do QA testing. Those guys are moving over, or those women or men are moving over to companies where they can actually program scripts from scratch or maintain very robust software systems that have been recently created. They don't want to work on legacy systems, which is what a lot of these engineers in enterprises are currently maintaining. So from an overall, I want to say 10,000-foot view, the level of preparedness is very low, and assigning responsibilities to finally make the decision to transfer over workloads from a centralized or a traditional IT architecture to a hybrid architecture, and maybe even to a colo. The skill, the responsibilities, etc., these are all large gaps across multiple enterprises. So overall preparedness, not very prepared.
But the desire's there, right? So
The desire
everyone
and
wants it.
aspirations are definitely there. It's just a matter of who is going to step up and commit to transferring or taking on the responsibility. And it's interesting, as you look deeper and deeper into how enterprises work, the IT function, which is the responsibility for a lot of these hybrids, they get an allocation of dollars per hour for IT professionals to work on applications, etc. If you told an IT professional, I need to work 80 hours a week to lift and ship a workload, they're most likely not going to want to do it, because the end result for them is, I'm going to have to do this anyway, or I'm going to get paid the same amount. There's no real outsized compensation for really over-delivering in these kinds of contexts. Because once again, 20 people per workload reporting to one senior director who manages 20 different teams. That's unfortunately the entire structure of how enterprises are uniform today is just not in position to enable a very quick transformation into the hybrid architecture. So desire is definitely there. It's just a matter of an allocation of resources and responsibility.
Jerry, what are you seeing from the front line with the enterprises? Is what Sammy's saying ringing true to you? Or
Absolutely.
engagement up there?
And for as much as we've built up our own resources to help address it, one of the major things that I look towards is that ecosystem effect, where partnerships are highly critical. Advisory services such as yours, helping the customer guide to where these locations are, how to best orchestrate a hybrid environment so you're not introducing enormous amounts of latency or what have you. Partnerships like Packet Fabric, who's not only a customer but a partner of ours, and having those resources, because it's not, in what we've seen, it has not been the traditional SI community that has been able to respond to this. It's really been more advanced boutique. A lot of these people have left Microsoft and left Amazon to start their own practices. So identifying just who these subject matter experts are is highly critical.
And Anna, what would you add to that? Helping out these enterprises make this move here, but helping them from the expertise level. Your customer base right now is a lot of maybe Silicon Valley, Web 2.0, high growth companies, but you're seeing some enterprise folks. What's the difference there with those folks?
Yeah, so there is a huge difference between, there's definitely, that knowledge gap we talked about, and a lot of our customer base is the savvy, Web 2.0 people right now, because they look at a product like ours and instantly get it, right? And they, oh, okay, great, I can automate connectivity, that's fantastic, and I can automate it to Amazon and Microsoft and whatever other third parties I want. Reaching the enterprise with that is definitely more of it's a little bit more of a challenge, and a lot of it comes into just how to package it and how to make it easier for folks, because I touched on before about it's not easy using these products like Amazon Direct Connect, unless you're a networking person. Going to set that up is a little bit daunting. You're just like, what am I doing here? What IP addresses do you want? Like, I'm not really sure. So a lot of that is just making it, more intuitive for the enterprise folks who maybe understand like their internal networking, how their internal network works. Don't necessarily understand big concepts like how to run, BGP out on the internet. It's very common in like the service provider world, or people that run their own networks. How to make that more understandable for the enterprise players, and basically give them the expertise through automation that they don't necessarily have in-house.
So expertise through automation. So let's talk expertise through manual means, Daryl. So Twilio, again, when we started working with them, didn't understand how to build anything outside of AWS, and they brought you in to do that. Now, the big picture is a lot of this expertise is being gathered up by major companies like the Netflix, Facebooks, Googles of the world, which leaves few experts out there to be gobbled up. And I think we heard that on a couple panels. So that being said, what would you say for the non-Netflix, non-Facebook company? What should they be prepared for? How should they start thinking about hybrid cloud and helping them with this transition?
Well, the methodology I took was taking a look at how the company operates first, and that was cloud native, AWS. That's what they're accustomed to. So I created automation and APIs around that essentially lets them treat this new network edge that I put out as if it's an AWS asset, or it looks very much the same to them. So I think wrapping the right control and automation around something to fit what the bulk of the developers and operations staff in the company is already accustomed to is a lot faster path than trying to retrain everyone or drag a bunch of new people, and seemed to work for us very well.
So we've got a couple more questions, but I think we have about 10 minutes left. Wanted to open up to the audience with any questions before we end. Yeah, please.
So I think when you look across retail providers, I see one company that charges a very significant premium due to network density, brand, and a lot of other things. I guess my question would be, as the enterprises do get more sophisticated, as they're able to use Packet Fabric to do some of this SD-WAN connections. I guess, do you think that and some of the other vendors are getting a lot more sophisticated. I guess, do you think that there's a risk that premium pricing gets eroded over time?
I think there are a lot of people that hope that it would get eroded over the course of time. That's a great question. I'll put that out to some of the operators here. But what do you think, Jerry?
Sure. Everything, there's an ebb and flow with all of that. So if there's pricing pressure on that, I would say more, you look at kind of the evolution of, you talked about SD-WAN, but, simple things of moving from, gig to 10G, now to 100G, that's maybe taking, 5 of those interconnections down to 1. How do you price that? How do you value that? But, based on the previous panel, you can see the rates in which are being paid for these network dense facilities. There's a reason behind that, is that it's very difficult to recreate. To whatever degree, we can leverage through partnerships or just, simple inertia of getting, very specifically the carriers to build some redundancies in markets, so not everyone is so dependent on one building in a market, I think is the most critical factor. Could allow greater competition, and if that brings rates down, that should bring volume up, which in all should be a good thing.
Because a lot of those ecosystems that are expensive are really large ecosystems that probably aren't going anywhere. But we heard from some of the other panels around the push to the edge. I think that starts breaking that monopoly, if you want to think of it that way.
A little bit, just to follow up on that too, a little bit of different dynamic as it relates to hybrid cloud connectivity. If you're looking at something in kind of the traditional peering realm, those numbers matter, having 200 networks. But as it relates to the cloud connectivity, it's a different dynamic. It's not necessarily like how many carriers in a specific building. It's a finite number of which are the right ones and which ones have, products or have built in, the API development into these cloud providers. So it's not necessarily a 150 versus 200. It's having the right 2025.
As a follow-up, so Anna, your Packet Fabric's product, in a lot of ways, speeds up this erosion because you're leveraging one cross connect to access many endpoints, but you're partners with these guys too. So how do you balance that dichotomy out? But really, what do you think about that?
Well, so here we're not taking away the thing. Like at the end of the day, we're not taking away the cross connect business. Like that's still there. People still need to have a physical connection to us in order to do anything. Like we're not taking away that physical network connection piece. One of the main things that we are doing though is we're allowing people, because there is a limited amount of locations that Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, all the cloud players, they're only in a limited amount of locations, and that's the limited set where you can connect to them. And so one of the things we are doing is that we're opening up the doors where that's not the only place that you have to be anymore to connect to those cloud providers. We're allowing you to, if you're in a Kansas City data center, you can still connect to Amazon in US East 1 because we're providing, the network from Kansas to Virginia. So that's one of the things we are doing is actually, we're just breaking down the barriers to entry to making that connectivity. And I would like to think that that's actually a good thing for the data center providers because, in general, it's allowing people to be where they are served best from a co-location point of view instead of having to jam themselves into these carrier dense facilities when they don't necessarily have a reason to be there aside from just maybe a couple key connections. And there are many impacted points in the co-location space. So.
It's really important too because that we see that. I mean, yes, there's customers within the 4 walls of the building or the campus that are leveraging any of the private connectivity products from the cloud, but it's 10 to 1, if not greater, ratio of these connections coming from another location, whether it's another third-party colo, whether it's their on-prem facility, but it's being brought in by Packet Fabric, by one of the carriers, and that's really the lion's share of that connectivity. So, as being one of the locations.
Yeah.
Absolutely welcome all these, the partnerships like that.
Create stickiness for you, in other words.
Hi, quick question regarding the skills shortage and some of the different cases that you've all seen. So if you're having conversations with CIOs, CTO buyers who are the ones that are primarily consuming a lot of these models, and they're concerned with their inability to support a hybrid cloud-like deployment, what one or two pieces of advice would you give to handle the curve as to how they can best prepare the original teams so they can actually make a purchasing decision and invest in something like this?
Outside of firing everybody, right? Yeah, sure. So the question is, if you are at the top, the CIO level, and you want to make that shift to hybrid cloud, how do you prepare? What bits of advice could the panel give on preparing your team for that shift? Let's grab that one.
I think
Patrick?
it's very important to understand the exact use case that you're going to be doing. Is it elastic cloud? Is it simply separating by application? You want some apps in the cloud, you want some on the rack. So I think getting the use case and requirements down from the very beginning is extremely important.
Sammy, you and I chatted a little bit about this actually yesterday at dinner, and some of the struggles that Credit Suisse had with this, because you have a huge IT team, of course. So if there's anything you could share about what you saw there, could you share some of these things?
Sure. I mean, this is not very specific to Credit Suisse. It's actually specific to most Fortune 500s and specifically financial services. There just needs to be a retuning and refocus in terms of how resources are allocated. And I kind of give you guys a quantitative idea is that 50% of IT spend for most Fortune 500 enterprises actually goes to maintaining existing systems. It doesn't actually go towards upgrading or advancing applications and connectivity. So a lot of enterprises are still dealing with this massive bottleneck of maintaining multiple generations of IT infrastructure. What really needs to happen is a complete, almost exactly what Patrick said was, decide or determine the applications that should definitely be moved over, and then just start retuning the human capital against those workloads. And if you do that application by application, you can really lock down what you think should be most optimal, what can run external, and what can be run internal. So I think that's a big key example I think I heard about was AT&T about 3 years ago said on stage, we've completely changed the way our workforce thinks about upgrades and system changes. Now, coincidentally, in the last 3 years, you also see a lot of networking equipment providers book less revenues. There's a reason for that. All those engineers are now thinking, I don't want to solve my problem using more IT spend. I want to solve my problem with existing infrastructure by just retuning what I already know into more efficient operating systems. And that's starting to happen. It's going to happen bit by bit, application by application, but over time, it's a time game. That's one set, but I would say retuning of the workforce is probably the priority. But it's like a push-pull. It's always going to be a push-pull scenario because you take away resources from maintaining the network or maintaining the infrastructure to new greenfield projects, but then you simultaneously need to maintain this massive infrastructure with all the users on top of it. So it's going to be a big juggling act, really, not only for big banks, which are huge IT consumers, but all Fortune 500s. So, one of the biggest sectors that I point out, which is I would describe as early innings of any type of transformation, is actually healthcare. So a lot of their data isn't even digitized. That's why every time you walk in, even if you went on ZocDoc.com, put in all your information and your healthcare credentials, even though you do that, you walk into the actual healthcare provider's office and guess what you do? You fill out more credentials. That completely takes you a step back. You are not digitizing any records in a streamlined fashion. So every time you do something like that, these are bottlenecks or more bottlenecks in the process. And unfortunately, a lot of enterprises are dealing with similar type scenarios, just not at that extreme. So those are some of my observations from the field and what I've been able to collect from CIOs or just general IT concerns.
I think we have time for one more question. In the back?
Yes, good morning. As we talk to our client base, our prospects regarding transferring their workloads to the cloud, what challenges, misunderstandings, or lack of education does a customer base have that you are experiencing as you go consistently through a client base? What are you observing, and then what advice can you give us so that we don't make those mistakes or educators?
First of all, deploy architect. That's something you can hire in to begin with, architect your cloud environment. But you're going to have a dedicated operations staff, and depending on how you're split up on deploying applications, potentially your platform services or whoever does your deployment pipeline, they're going to need to deeply understand the differences in being deployed into a public cloud as opposed to being on bare metal in a rack somewhere. Once you're past that platform part, it's going to look a lot the same, providing you are running software that is already capable of being intrinsically redundant. And hopefully everybody has that in their bare metal data centers. But if that's a transition you're making, it's really just, I would say, operating system down. You need to build that knowledge base around the operations management and the initial architecture.
Anybody else want to add to that before we?
I'd add one thing. I mean, we're all focusing on the vision of an enterprise and moving items out to cloud and getting comfortable with that cloud experience. Some of the largest transactions we've done over the past couple of years have been cloud native companies that have now decided to have some form of physical infrastructure for a variety of reasons. But for whatever reason why they want to kind of control their own destiny with physical infrastructure, that's out there too, and that presents its own unique challenges of kind of taking what has always been out in the cloud and putting it in the quote-unquote physical world. And we're seeing quite a bit of that as well, so it's really going both directions.
Right, so I mean, a cloud on-ramp is the same as a cloud off-ramp. It's a ramp's a ramp, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be what I would add is, don't forget the network, because there is no hybrid cloud without the network, right? Because whatever it is, whether you're privatizing things or taking them to a public cloud, it means that you're moving things over the network, and that's probably one of the most overlooked pieces of the whole entire strategy is how to do that effectively, and both in terms of cost and in terms of time and in terms of latency and a bunch of things, so don't forget that.
And I think the education really has to start, perhaps at the C level, so that people at that level know what the cloud is, how it benefits them cost-wise and every other way. And from there, they'll expend the resources to get the training to staff who may be resistant to such change, to hire the right people, perhaps leadership in the area that can guide that staff through getting it built. And of course, the education has to boil down through the ranks, and you have to be able to train those people specifically on what you're trying to get done.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but that was fun for me. So thanks to the panelists for your thoughts here, and we'll be here for a bit. So if you have any other questions you want to ask, please come up.